Greetings, everyone. Matt Hiles here from Mosaic Networks. Thanks for joining. I think we've got a smaller audience today. I think folks are really starting to develop that webinar fatigue, but I'm sure you will be glad you attended this one. This is our X Factor series. Today, the topic is choosing the right SD-WAN. So very timely topic. We move through these very quickly. In 20 minutes, you're going to get some grab and go information that you can take back out to the field and differentiate yourself as a partner with your clients with just a greater body of knowledge in this important area of SD-WAN. So with that, we'll get started. I like to introduce ourselves, myself first, and Justin Wilson, who is our head of technology and engineering. He'll be covering most of the technical content today. I will start off by introducing the company, and I think it's important because people want to know, who they're talking to and why they should be talking to them. And so Mosaic Networks is a specialty IT infrastructure provider. We started in 2007 as a network aggregator, and I think as a company we perform that function as good, if not better, than anyone else in the business. There was an inflection in 2015 with the advent of SD-WAN, and Mosaic was an early adopter of that technology, and we selected VeloCloud after looking at a number of the players, and then did our first VeloCloud deployment in 2016. Shortly thereafter, we started to add additional SD-WAN technologies, and including Meraki, and most recently Cato Networks, which those three will be the topics du jour. And then in 2020, we acquired an MSSP, managed services security provider out of the Bay Area. And that enabled us to quick start our professional service and cybersecurity practice. And to kind of look at those in another way, global network aggregation, the transport services, the carrier services that we're all very comfortable selling, that sort of is the foundation of what we do and what we call a triad of strategic IT services. On top of that, we layer, fully managed or co-managed SD-WAN or SASE, which is the next evolution of SD-WAN, all industry-leading technologies. And then cybersecurity across a number of areas and a number of layers in cybersecurity. And be sure to keep an eye out. We'll have an upcoming cybersecurity X Factor series coming up on some cyber stuff that you'll find very helpful and informative. And finally, professional services and project management. This is where it all comes together. If you can't excel in the pro services and the project management side of this, you're going to have an unhappy customer. And unhappy customers are hard to upsell. They're hard to get referrals from. So you definitely want to execute with precision in this area. And Mosaic does that as a single vendor across all of these technologies and platforms. So with that said, I will hand this over to Justin Wilson, who is the head of technology and engineering for Mosaic Networks.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here with everybody today. Just a quick introduction about myself. As Matt said, I run everything technology and engineering at Mosaic. So that's everything kind of post-sales. Other than the finance side of things, our network operations team, service delivery, provisioning, engineering, and so forth, those teams all roll up through me. So I wanted to just take a minute and talk about a few things here. So a little bit of background on myself. I've got decades of experience working in the IT industry in both customer side facing the IT world, as well as consulting and on the opposite side of the desk. Spent some time with various companies around the globe, such as Deloitte, Lookout Mobile Security, and Slack, where I held leadership roles at each of those companies. Also founded the company that was acquired by Mosaic Brew Labs, where we worked with high growth startups that were doubling, tripling in size and need to put infrastructure, IT infrastructure and security in place fast to support their existing customer base and their own security requirements. So that said, today we're going to talk about what SD-WAN vendor is right for your customers. We've taken the approach that we're looking at it from the perspective of how are you supporting remote workforce? How's that SD-WAN vendor supporting your remote workforce? What security does it layer in, if at all? But also we've looked at the landscape of what vendors are out there, everything from your Cisco's to Palo Alto's and VMware and Meraki and Cato and so forth. And we've really narrowed it down to VMware, Cato, and Meraki. These are some of the most common deployments that we've seen in the field. And they're also the ones that we've heard from our customers that they don't tend to hate themselves after deploying with your Cisco Viptelas and your Palo Altos and so forth. They tend to be a very complex deployment, and they often go off the rails. So we're really focusing on three of the most common ones and the ones that tend to get deployed successfully in a short amount of time. So with that said, looking at the networking capabilities of these three vendors, they have a lot in common across the board. And you'll start to see them differentiate themselves as we move into some of the other capabilities and aspects of the solutions. Key things to take away from this is both Cato and VMware have what you'd call gateways or POPs that are distributed around the globe. And that's for centralizing how traffic is handled and managed. So those allow for that multi-path optimization that you're going to see with multiple circuits in place and cleaning up those circuits and so forth. Whereas Meraki does not offer that. Their solution is really, I don't want to call it DIY by any means, but there's no gateways or POPs involved. They have their management dashboard, but they're not funneling traffic through that management dashboard. It's really site-to-site connectivity and out to the internet. Your circuits are independent of each other. When they're deployed with multiple circuits on the Merakis. They're all a licensed product. So, and we'll get into those licensing differences in a little bit here, but they all have different licensing aspects to them. But as we get into those security capabilities, you start seeing some of those differentiators. While all three products have firewalling capabilities, one thing to point out on the VMware VeloCloud side is it is not intended to be a replacement for a security appliance or something that has deeper security functionality. VeloCloud works with a number of vendors such as Zscaler and others where you can layer in additional security capabilities. But by itself, it's actually, that firewall is fairly basic. It's just used for opening and closing ports. But they do have the ability to integrate with Zscaler, as I mentioned, or deploy virtual network firewalls or VNFs on the same hardware as the VeloCloud. So from those VNFs can be from Palo Alto, Checkpoint, and Fortinet and others. Then you look at Cato. Cato is actually designed with a security first mentality. They're doing the difference with them is they're shifting all that security to the Cato cloud or their POPs, if you will. So their devices are intended to funnel all that traffic back to the Cato cloud from each location, where they're applying firewall and threat protection, IDS, IPS, and network level malware scanning and so forth. It's all happening in the Cato cloud. Meraki has some similar security capabilities. They're doing it all locally on their devices, but they're doing it. It all depends on which license you have deployed. So they have an enterprise license and an advanced security license, which have different functionalities from a security perspective. Same hardware, but the license differentiates what capabilities are available to you. The other thing to point out in here that comes up often is customers are often looking for those remote client VPNs or road warrior VPNs. The only Cato and Meraki in this grid offer that client VPN capability. VeloCloud does not. There are third-party solutions that can be integrated to provide that, but it's not something that's native to VeloCloud, and that comes up fairly often. So one of the key things to take away there, and we'll talk about this in a moment as we look at some of the reference architectures, is VeloCloud is designed to slot in where there's a lot of this infrastructure already in place, whereas Cato and Meraki are designed to take more more of a holistic approach to the network management, including security.
And Justin, I'm going to add one other key differentiator, just reiterating something that you already mentioned between Cato and Meraki. And that primary difference there is that Cato is entirely cloud delivered, and Cisco Meraki is entirely premise based.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and for lack of a better way of putting it, the Cato hardware that gets deployed at branches and whatnot, I'll just term it as a dumb box. Its whole purpose in life is just to forward traffic back to the Cato cloud. It's not doing much locally.
That's right.
So I just want to cruise through the reference architectures for these three platforms, just as a point of reference before we dive into some of the other capabilities and differences. So we talked a little bit about this already. On the left, you've got the branch location. And as you move right, you've got the circuits coming into the branch edge location with the dynamic multipath optimization. What that means is it's using those circuits together in an active-active configuration and using those circuits to plug the hole in the other circuit. So if there's impairment on one, it's going to leverage that other circuit to route around that impairment, if you will. A lot of that is bound to the VeloCloud gateways that you're seeing there in the center of the diagram. Those gateways are distributed throughout the globe and often deployed on the doorstep of other key SaaS applications, same data center, same private cloud, and so forth. And then as you move to the right, you've got the enterprise data centers that are plugging into those same VeloCloud gateways. And then at the top there, it's all controlled by the VeloCloud Orchestrator, which is their management dashboard and platforms, which allows you to control all the functionality end to end on the VeloCloud platform.
And just to add there, Justin, all these SaaS applications that are shown here in the upper right, those are typically in the same data centers as the VeloCloud gateways. So they're essentially on the doorstep or one hop away, which is how they improve application performance with the VeloCloud technology.
That's right. Spot on. And then let's move on to Cato here. So Cato's architecture, while displayed a little bit differently on this diagram, is fairly similar to VeloCloud. On the left, again, you've got the branch, and then you get that VeloCloud socket, as they call it, the piece of hardware that sits on premise, or that can be physical or virtual, that uses those internet tunnels to connect back to the VeloCloud, or excuse me, the Cato POPs. Or provide site-to-site connectivity between the locations. But basically, those socket devices, as I mentioned, are just an on-ramp into the Cato cloud, which again sits on the doorsteps of common SaaS applications. And it's interconnected between all their POPs by a private backbone. So that's a key differentiator between Cato and VeloCloud. With VeloCloud, everything's leveraging public internet circuits. There's no private connectivity between the gateways. Whereas Cato, while they have fewer POPs than VeloCloud has gateways, they're using a private backbone to connect in between them. And all of those POPs are 100% mirror of every other one. Whereas the VeloCloud gateways are independent of each other, and each branch forms multiple tunnels to different gateways for failover and resiliency. There's still a possibility of change in IPs and things like that that could occur if a gateway were to go down. It's very rare that ever happens. I don't know that I've ever actually seen it happen, but since those gateways are not 100% mirror of them, there is a shifting time, if you will, between those gateways. Whereas the Cato POPs, they're 100% mirrored of each other. So if one POP goes down, that socket that's connected into the Cato backbone, private backbone, it's just going to redirect traffic to another POP. All the policies, everything that was dictated by on the other POP is going to be just 100% mirrored in that other POP. Your egress IPs stay the same, and so forth.
And the other, Justin, as you're going through this, we had a request to give examples of types of clients or businesses that would use one or the other of these technologies. Sure. So as you find it appropriate to maybe insert that, feel free to share.
Yeah, let's get through the reference architectures and then we'll touch on that for a moment.
Very good.
So at the top of this diagram, you see all the, sorry, Matt, if you don't mind going back. At the top of this diagram, you see all the functions that are being performed within the Cato Cloud. That includes security functions. So your firewall, your cloud security services, and network level malware scanning, that's all happening within the Cato Cloud. So as that branch forwards all that traffic into the Cato Cloud, all that scanning and threat prevention and so forth is all occurring in there within those POPs in the Cato Cloud. As we mentioned, VeloCloud does not have a client VPN for remote users. Cato does. And basically that client that gets deployed to your end users on their laptops and so forth will simply connect them into the Cato Cloud at the closest POP. And since all those POPs are a mirror of each other again, they're going to get the same policies that are applied at the POP that's closest to your branches and so forth, even if your remote users on the other side of the globe. They're going to get the same policies, same everything that's been configured for this network out of that POP, that closest POP that they're connected to. They don't have to select which POP. It automatically happens within the client and chooses the best place for them to connect into.
And just to reiterate, because there are a lot there, and to summarize, three primary differences here between Velo and Cato. One is that private backbone, which Cato calls optimized middle mile, that basically circumnavigates the whole globe, interconnecting all of their POPs, that they have advanced security, and it's all cloud-based and VPN capability, client VPN. So those would be some things that you'd want to be able to remember.
Absolutely. And then let's talk about Meraki for a moment. This diagram is obviously much simpler because the Meraki environment does not maintain gateways or POPs or anything like that. They've got their dashboard environment for controlling and orchestrating the entire environment. But essentially, most of the heavy lifting is done at the premise level in the hardware. They have the dynamic VPN tunnel capability, just as Cato and VeloCloud do. It's just all happening site to site. There's no negotiated VPNs out of a gateway. There's still a negotiated VPN out of the dashboard, but it's not funneling any traffic from an optimization standpoint through a gateway of any kind. So with the Meraki deployment, it has that client VPN that Cato does, except it's going to connect back into whatever branch that you've configured the client to connect back into. So if you have 10 branches around the globe, you're going to have to manually configure every single branch on it from a client VPN standpoint and select that branch that you're connecting into. So that's the reference architectures at a high level for each one of these. Looking at the ideal customers for each one of these types of deployments, honestly, you could take each one of these products and deploy them anywhere from a small 1 to 2 person office all the way up through a global enterprise. And you depend on the requirements and the needs, particularly on-prem infrastructure, things like that are needed to support. You can apply each one of these at scale at each one of those types of customers and everything in between. Where we see a lot of VeloCloud deployments happening is where there's an existing mature infrastructure from both a security standpoint and a routing standpoint and so forth. VeloCloud slots in nicely, and it's a good role player. It'll do SD-WAN, and it does SD-WAN really well. It's not trying to be security. It's not trying to replace your core network routers and so forth, and your firewalls and everything else. It's just trying to do SD-WAN and optimize traffic as much as possible. Cato really plays well when you are actually out of term on your support contracts or licenses for your existing firewalls and other security infrastructure. Cato, while everything's licensed a la carte, it actually is best suited to handle your entire security infrastructure. So replacing your firewalls, replacing your any edge routers and adding SD-WAN and so forth. Cato is often deployed with all the security capabilities that it offers. As you start stripping away those security capabilities, you can bring it down to the same level as VMware and slot it in, but it's really best deployed with all the security capabilities. And then Meraki is kind of that utility player. It can be security, it can not be security. I mean, the benefit of the Meraki solution is you can also have the entire Meraki stack of network hardware, so access points, switches, and so on, and have that true single pane of glass to manage an entire LAN and WAN. The thing to point out there is Meraki still doesn't offer that dynamic multipath. They offer load balancing between circuits, but it's not a true active-active. It's active in the sense that you can load balance, but if you lose a circuit, there is a shifting time frame to move that traffic from one circuit to the next, and you will have sessions drop. From a licensing standpoint, they all license slightly differently. The Cato and VeloCloud obviously have a throughput component to their licenses. Meraki does too, but it's very specific to the hardware that you're deploying on. You don't go out and buy a 10 meg license for Meraki. You're buying a license for the capabilities of whatever that piece of hardware can handle. From a security capability standpoint, as we already talked about, VeloCloud doesn't offer any add-on licenses directly. They have third parties that they work with, such as Zscaler, that can integrate into it. Cato, the licensing is a la carte. Meraki has 3 different license levels for their hardware. So enterprise, advanced security, and then one they've recently released, which isn't feature complete, called SD-WAN. And that's really going to distinguish what capabilities you have on the Meraki platform. They all offer them for various terms and so forth. Co-termination is sometimes possible with Meraki. VeloCloud doesn't offer it. Cato requires it. And then go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Justin, go right ahead.
No, please.
Yeah. So back to Stan's question about types of companies. I think, Stan, we've deployed all 3 of these technologies pretty much in a vertically agnostic way. I mean, we've got basically every type of company on every one of these technologies. And as Justin mentioned, it often hinges on what they already have in place. If they have an existing, security infrastructure, then Cato is probably not the right fit, and probably not Meraki either. So really that customer-facing discovery really turns up a lot of information for us to start making recommendations. And we go through a very similar checklist to what you see here. But I don't think there's any exclusions for verticals or types or size of companies for any of these technologies or vendors.
Yeah, and just to add on to that a little bit, I mean, just anecdotal information that I can share, like Meraki tends to actually have a bigger presence in the hospitality space, particularly food service and so forth, fast food restaurants and so on. They actually have a big footprint there. But that's not necessarily any indication that it's better suited for that vertical. It's just they were one of the first cloud managed network platforms out there, and so they've done traditionally pretty well in there because you obviously have a distributed branches and limited resources to manage it from an IT perspective. At the same time, when I was at Slack, we deployed a Meraki stack top to bottom for network infrastructure, switches, access points, firewalls, and we did it globally. And we did it without a full-time network engineer to manage the infrastructure at that time. And so we had 10 offices completely spread across the globe, and we were able to use Meraki to leverage that. That said, that was before Cato was on the scene and VeloCloud and so forth. So there's definitely options there. It really just depends on what the customer's requirements really come down to, as Matt put it.
And Justin, we've got 5 minutes to the top of the hour, and I want to leave at least a couple of minutes to field a question or two from the audience.
Sure.
We've got, maybe 1 or 2 more slides here, and we can wrap.
Yeah. So one of the things that I want to point out, and then I'll hand it back to Matt, is what we like to consider SD-WAN's better with Mosaic, because we're not just looking at the SD-WAN technology. We have the ability to provision circuits and monitor the entire IT infrastructure, the WAN infrastructure, and so on. We can provide security services beyond just SD-WAN. We have professional services for deployment versus having to roll it on the customer having to roll it themselves. And we tie it all together with our 24/7, 365 NOC, SOC, and everything that they provide from a support capability and engineering capability.
And for the partners and trusted advisors here, that can be the primary impediment or obstacle for going forward on a project like this, is that the client just doesn't have the resources to do it. And that's where, you know, we raise our hand at Mosaic Networks and say, you know, we handle the project management. And some of you have experienced that with us, so you know that to be true, but that's an objection that you can overcome. And so I'll just keep going because that's the last slide. Just kind of summarizing where we fit in the supply chain. We are Mosaic Networks is an agile IT infrastructure provider. We talked about that pyramid, that stack of strategic IT services, global network aggregation with literally hundreds of carriers globally that we can leverage and deliver in a single vendor solution. SD-WAN delivered as a service. We talked a bit about security, and we'll be talking more about that in future X Factor webinars coming up, so be sure to join those as well. Security is a very hot topic. We hear more and more about it every day. I don't like to talk about the fear component of it, and we don't, but we all know that it can be very costly and very damaging for your customers when it happens. And then we take all of that and wrap it around our bulletproof customer experience and complex integrations with our professional services. And the idea here is to give the customer, you know, a highly orchestrated single vendor solution. So with that said, we've got a minute or two for any examples, for any questions from the folks. And I think we've got another one from Stan, is asking, from a performance perspective, including low latency, is Cato the way to go?
Yeah, I'll take that. I would say that Cato is not exclusive in the low latency world. I would say if you're really looking at low latency, Cato and VeloCloud actually can play very nicely there. Obviously, Cato's got their private backbone between their POPs and so forth. And once you egress from the branch and get onto the Cato backbone, you're riding the Cato backbone to the next closest POP to egress out of the Cato cloud to wherever, or the closest POP to that destination that your traffic's going to. So they do have some advantages there. That said, the VeloCloud gateways are deployed on the doorstep of common SaaS applications. So you often don't see a noticeable difference between Cato or VeloCloud. Provided you set up the optimizations and everything else that you want, you've got solid internet connections at your locations, and you're not trying to do this over like a single satellite link and so on. That can be said as an impediment to any platform. So I think that from a performance perspective, you could really seriously look at Cato or VeloCloud for that perspective. I don't think Meraki plays well in the low latency standpoint because they don't maintain those gateways or POPs on their own end. They do have the ability to optimize traffic and so forth, but it's not something that they're actively deploying egress points where you can optimize traffic for low latency and so forth.
We are at the top of the hour. We could slide one more question in if we had to. Any other questions from the attendees today? We hope you found this to be informative and valuable. Take it out to the field, be a stronger expert with your SD-WAN technology in your next conversations, and keep an eye out for our upcoming X Factor series on cybersecurity. You won't want to miss that one either. Thanks for joining today.